morning, good afternoon, and good evening from wherever you're joining us around the world. My name is Ali Hirji, head of the advisory of the Cyber Exchange, and I'm full-time at Durham College at the AI Hub in the Center for Cybersecurity. Enough about me. We're going to jump right into this session on the balancing act and the imposter syndrome. What does that mean? Well, we're going to delve into it. What are the different facets we're going to look at it from? We're here to hear from various leaders in the cybersecurity space. You know, they often say that you want something said, you go to a man. You want something done, you go to a woman. We're actually going to make sure that that point is made very loud and clear, but we're also going to take it a step further and break the gender dichotomies and break the male and female understandings. There's more to this and more fluidity. And we're going to go into how professional women in this space have navigated it and are continuing to empower others to join them. So enough from me. I'm not going to introduce the speakers or panelists myself. I'm going to have them introduce themselves with a question. Number one, your name, where do you work? But more importantly, when did you realize that the cybersecurity, the tech space is the one for you? I'm going to start off with Sherry. Sherry, over to you.
Good morning. My name is Sherry Rumbold, and I work for the Department of National Defense, and I'm a Senior Information Security Officer at the national level. And I think when I think about cybersecurity, I remember way back in 2004, I had already dabbled in IMIT and encryption and a few other things, but I went to work at a place called the Computer Incident Response Center for National Defense, and I felt like I had just entered Starship Enterprise. And I'm like, wow, this is so cool. Look at all this tech and all these fancy screens and everything. And I was hooked almost from day one. I thought this is the most magnificent sort of situation that I've ever put myself into. And I was drinking through a fire hose, but it was fantastic. And just seeing those attacks live and things like that was just amazing. And I was very fascinated by the whole experience. And I think it was just lift off from there.
Sherry, I really like the fact that you brought on the time factor of when it began. And I want everybody to realize that 2004, and if you just think about the socio-political context at the time, it'll tell you quite a bit of how challenging it was. Don't think about it as the same. There are different social contexts within that. So I really like that. Thank you, Sherry. We'll go on to Helen now. Helen, as always, love the artwork in the background. Over to you.
Hi, everybody. So my name is Helen, and I work for SAP in cybersecurity space. I haven't been always working in SAP and in cybersecurity, but how I got into that, I've gone through acquisition to SAP with a smaller company. And during that process, SAP actually has a very strong standards for security, which we got introduced, and I was like, wow, let's go into that. And it was so fascinating. So since then, I learned more and more, and I finally got into the space as a full-time. So that was a really great journey. And, you know, talking about balancing act, I had to learn a lot, and the balancing between what I can do, what I cannot do. Am I good enough for this role or not? It was a challenge, never ending balance that I had to continuously learn. And thank you for the mentors that I had and people who surrounded me and supported me and really believed in me. I think that's helped a lot on my cybersecurity journey. So here I am.
Thank you for that. And I like the fact that you've already brought up the aspect of mentors. And we're going to jump into that because a lot of the folks that are on the advisory committee have been mentors to me and that got me into that circle. And we're going to talk about how you can bring people into that space. Many of you as leaders in the space, how you've brought more people into it. So thank you for raising that point, Helen. I'm going to turn it over to Kat. Kat, you do a lot of work with universities and college, young students, etc. Can you talk to us a little bit about what you currently do and when was that moment that you realized this is the space for me?
Sure. I'm Kat Code, and around grade 7, I really liked disassembling and reassembling calculators. So I knew I wanted to do something technical. And then one day I saw a video or a commercial, back when there were commercials, for AT&T for a video phone, which was totally novel and crazy. So I went into electrical engineering so I could build video phones. Here we are 30 years later with video. This has pretty much saved a lot of corporate space right now with this video technology. So there we go. But at the time, it was pretty crazy. And then I spent over a decade at BlackBerry, which was very male-dominated tech world. I was in software architecture. I was usually the only woman in senior management in a lot of the departments. And then when I had my second daughter, I left RIM to run my own data privacy company to help people better understand what they were putting online, because I realized that so many kids were living online these days. And then that evolved into the fact that, frankly, corporate is living online. And so I went back to my corporate roots, and I've been doing data privacy consulting for corporations around compliance and, of course, cyber education.
Thank you so much, Kat. And we're going to come into that aspect of cyber education and awareness and sort of unpack that a little bit more when we talk about some mentorship circles that folks can get into. So hold on to that thought. We have two more amazing individuals to hear from. I'll start off from Nikhila, and then Pia will go to you. Nikhila, when we've not spoken before, when I read your background and spoke to Mary a lot, you definitely come out shouting and come out strong, not just because your voice can be heard, but so that everybody's unheard voices can be heard. Tell us a little bit about what it is that you do and what got you into that moment when you realized this is the space for me.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Nikhila Sandage. I'm a computer security engineer at NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory here in Pasadena, California. And honestly, it's a really reflective point, Ali. It really didn't just start when I said, oh, I want to go to graduate school and study cybersecurity. It really took a point where I said, you know what? I was always a gifted student. I was that student, that could guess the amount of graham crackers in a jar amongst hundreds of students. I was always thrilled by challenges. But, another thing that I realized is I was always surrounded around people that didn't look like me. And so, I was unaffected in a way because I knew I was smart enough, I was capable, and things of that nature. But I did, at some point in my life want to turn around and, so I actually attended HBCU, Historical Black College and University, twice, right? And because I wanted to be surrounded around people that are like-minded but also look like me, and that meant a lot to me. But I studied computer science at Mississippi Valley State University, and I had some internships, that weren't my favorite. I'll just say that. They weren't my favorite. I didn't see myself in a place like those. And so I said, well, you know what? I have to go to graduate school. And I did. And I said, I'm going to pursue cybersecurity because I'm actually more interested in this. I see a mission and purpose behind what I'm doing. And it's not just me being an introvert. I'm more like an extrovert. I like to collaborate, and I don't want to just code and be alone and then deliver. That's what I've seen in my experiences, and I wanted to change that. And, like I said, it's really like a reflective point. I'm amongst individuals that, are a part of a more diverse community. And I love where I am now at NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory, where I first interned, and then I was granted a full-time opportunity at the end of my internship while still in graduate school, studying cybersecurity. And so that's pretty much my path, but I didn't allow my experiences to deter me from where I wanted to be. And I think that's really important when we're talking about the balancing act, when we're talking about imposter syndrome, because I encountered that my entire life. I was always in a classroom full of people that didn't look like me, but that didn't mean to give up, just to, keep working harder and really realizing where I wanted to go. It's not about where you're from, it's about where you're going. And I encourage everyone to, keep that at the forefront.
Indeed, it's about progress, not perfection, and well said or well done is better than well said. Nikhila, thank you so much for that perspective. And I'm very sure I've already got one message asking about, can we focus on some of the lesser known education paths and the grassroots movements that young individuals can take on in their pursuit of a technology field? Pia, we're now coming over to you, and I only met you last week for a brief 20 odd minutes, and you pack a punch for sure in the world of security, leading some exciting initiatives at a brilliant company called Security Scorecard. When we were talking the first time, you remind me of the fact, women don't just belong, they're not the exception in places where decisions are being made. They belong there, and you're someone who really personifies that. Pia, can we hear a little bit from you about, what brought you, what do you do today, but what brought you to that moment of realization that this is the space where I'm going to define my line? Pia?
Sure, thank you, and thanks for having me. I'm really excited to join. I am the Vice President of Solutions Engineering for Security Scorecard. So my group, it's a global team of solutions engineers that really focus on talking to customers and prospects around our solutions. Everybody on my team is security minded and practitioners at heart. So our team is really the kind of the security experts on the supporting the revenue and the customer organization for security scorecard. I found myself in cybersecurity around 13 years ago. After graduating, I graduated with a business degree with a focus in marketing. But I was always that tech geek at heart. I was kind of the computer person that everybody went to ask tech support questions across the family. So I found a really great marriage between marketing and technical in the solutions engineering or sales engineering role. And I found myself at Rapid7 actually 13 years ago when they were a really small startup in security, and now they're much larger. And I was there for 8.5 years as a solutions engineer and really started managing and leading people really early on in my career. But that experience, I had a lot of male mentors, and for me, it took me a while to find my voice. But when I did is really when my career took off, is when I could take the messages and the information I was getting from so many people and really make it my own and personalize it. And so my career took off from there. And I've since joined 2 other startups, and now I'm at Security Scorecard. So I've really found a career in cybersecurity startups. Love the energy associated with the environment. In security, love the problems that we're solving. They're so relevant and at times very complex. And I love kind of breaking down problems and simplifying it, which is really the essence of, I think, what we all do. But that's really where I found my drive and excitement around the industry that we're in today.
Thank you so much for that, Pia. So let's just jump right into the question. I've got a couple that have come in. I'll weave them into the conversation. Sherry, let's begin with you. I know that you're someone who's aspired to the fact that, you know what, we should be in a future where it's not just, oh, we have female leaders, we have leaders, period. And I know that you're aspiring towards that kind of state. But in your situation where you're leading or you're in pretty high profile organization, what are some of the stereotypes that you feel that you're facing when it comes forward to saying, no, people, this is how things are and this is how we're going to do it in order to stay safe and resilient? Sherry, some perspective for you in 2 minutes, please.
I think that most people are aware, probably in government, things move a little bit slower than in the private sector. So that's a bit of a challenge in itself. And then also to look at innovative ideas and different ideas and say, let's just try to do something a little bit different. The one thing I find is that we still have this kind of perfection syndrome. Everybody wants to be 100% all the time. And one of the things that I want to sort of instigate, and I'm doing this, and I think a lot of people are doing that, is saying, let's just get to 60% or good, and then let's improve upon that. And I think that that's sometimes, depending on the organization you work for, there's risk involved with some of that, and some organizations are very risk adverse. But I think that these times, especially right now with everything that's happened in the last several months, I think it's really catapulted us into a very new way of thinking and innovative thinking and things like that. So I think that it's not necessarily about what we can do, because I think when we all pull together, we can do really great work. And I think that we've seen that not only throughout Canada, but also internationally, especially during, circumstances such as COVID-19 and whatnot. And I'm hoping that we can learn some very valuable lessons from that and say that there's a lot of great ideas out there. There's a lot of really great people, regardless of who you are or what you look like, that can actually bring fantastic ideas and innovative situations to the forefront, and we can build that. And I think that what I'd like to see a lot more in culture is being open to ideas, being open to thinking outside of, where we currently sit and moving that yardstick just a little tiny bit. And for me, that's really important. And, being in a larger institution, sometimes that's a harder thing to do, but I'm actually quite amazed at how fast we've been able to innovate in a very, very short time, without getting into a lot of specifics, but we've been able to actually move things very quickly and move into an environment where we can get people back to work and things like that. And I think that that's actually a testament to what we can achieve if we actually, stop thinking about the old cultural ways of doing business and putting ourselves into a new way of doing business. And that's where we can look to our younger generations and our folks that are still in school, still looking for these opportunities to actually advance themselves. And they're kind of our future. So I think we should sort of sit up and take notice of that.
Thank you for that, Sherry. And we'll take off from the closing point that you made, which is take notice of that. And I want to bring Kat into the conversation really quickly here. So Kat, you're in your position here. You get organizations to take notice of certain blind spots that typically can shake them at the core. And often, in the work that we've done together at Durham College, when you tell someone, hey, you may not be compliant with this particular standard, they often respond with, well, I am, and I do this and I do that. Do you find that in your situation, and especially dealing with a lot of men and leaders and so on and so forth, but there are certain stereotypes that kick in that make it difficult for you or challenging for you to get your point across? And if so, how do you overcome some of that?
So that's a really tricky one. It's a little bit different in the role I'm in now because I'm brought in as a consultant. So I'm being brought in as someone who is the subject matter expert. But I certainly know from BlackBerry, sitting in a room with a bunch of men, there is this notion, and I want to say again, we just want to be people in cybersecurity and people in tech, but there are innate differences. And one of them is that men will have a tendency to speak up in a meeting room and women don't. And really as women, what we need to do, and even as men, everyone needs to amplify the people in the room. And that's one of the things we can all do with each other is if you're in a room and there's someone in that room, especially people who are quieter or who are shy, they've got a great idea, amplify that idea and then point back to that person. Like, you know what, Sherry just had a great idea. She mentioned that, because often what'll happen is someone will mention it and then someone who just happens to have a bigger voice, which unfortunately ends up being men over women, will say the same idea or something similar and everyone jumps on that idea. So this amplification that's come out recently where we've all kind of said, if you hear someone with a great idea, amplify that, share those posts, even just on LinkedIn, to say, hey, here's someone who knows what they're talking about and it's great and you should be watching this person.
Thank you for that. And that aspect of how you communicate as a women leader in this space and how you big up your colleagues, I think that has a huge implication on making sure that the stage is ready for others to come onto the way and creating that opportunity for them to speak. That's where organizations like Leading Cyber Ladies, I always wondered about the name, and it's all about leading and leading by example. And I want to take some of those points and bring it to Helen. But before we go to Helen, I'll go to Nikhila, Pia, and then Helen. Nikhila, I've got two questions that have sort of come to you, and I'm just going to try and weave it all together. I mean, the saying, right? The only place where your dreams are impossible is in your own thinking. And the questions that are coming to you is, what was it like as a person of color, as a woman, stepping in to say, oh, I'm here. How did that feeling transpire?
And so, I'm sorry, so your question is, how did I feel?
How did you feel? Yeah.
Yeah, so how did I feel? Honestly, I feel like I have to be the only one. I have to at least start somewhere when we're talking about making changes. As a whole, if we're looking at our industry, until there's 50% of minority and also women, we're not changing as a whole. And, at least I contribute to a small percentage of that. And, it makes me feel empowered in a way to do so. I want to lead. I want to be a voice for everyone. So it's actually very empowering to do so because we are changing, the dynamic of our industry.
Thank you for that, Nikhila. And again, we are empowering someone, which is a good sort of segue to bring in Helen, the question was for Nikhila, but I think I want to weave it into you. And the question is, do you find yourself where people are like, yeah, it's women in cybersecurity, sure, you're talking about it. It's just for women, and only women need to hear this conversation. So Helen, when you sort of do a lot of great work with Leading Cyber Ladies, how do you sort of, navigate that territory, which is, no, this is a conversation for everyone and anyone? Helen, 2 minutes.
Yeah, thank you for bringing this up because that's exactly what I had on my mind to talk about. It's kind of like a split angle, right? From one side, we hear that we need more women and we need to help them to engage in their career. We need to listen. And then I hear whole bunch of conversations like, oh, we had enough of this already, right? So I really, when I navigate the space, I really position it as everyone. There is no difference between how we have men or women in a career. We lead differently, and by our actually diversity, we will create and solve these problems. And at the table, like Kat mentioned, we need to help, we need to ask them to speak up, and we need to ask for their opinion, because collaboratively, we will solve the problem that we have, and we have a lot of problems in security.
Thank you so much for that. And you know, that aspect, we have a lot of problems in security. And I say this all the time to my students, to my colleagues: find the problem and then go in search of the solution. Don't just throw out different solutions, but let's do this, let's do that, without knowing what is it that you want to tackle. I think, you know, those of you who are on the advisory committee for the Cyber Exchange, you'll know that when we've spoken to Maddie and team, we've said, you know, you just want to do a conference of women in cybersecurity? Sure, sounds good. But what do we want to tackle? And when you get groups like Leading Cyber Ladies, WCYCS, and all of these other groups, that is where you build community. And Pia, I want to take this aspect of building community and leadership and bring it to you. Looking at your journey now, you know, we can only assume that you lead a lot of teams, you bring a lot of new folks onto the table and guide them through this journey and to make security scorecards, you know, successful, and whatever else have you. I see folks like Brian are on, and Rishi, etc., are on, cheering you on. How has it been like as a woman in cybersecurity, leading teams and presumably leading some men as well? Have you first faced any challenges there? Yeah.
Yeah, so I think at first when I started leading, I felt like I needed to prove myself. Like I needed to tell everybody how smart I was and how much I knew, and really learned and that the power is more so in the questions that you're asking and the engagement that you have with the people that you're interacting with. Especially that goes for building teams, and it also goes for talking to customers and talking to security folks and solving problems. So that was a big lesson learned for me, was you don't need to prove yourself. You're already at the table and you already have the opportunity to lead, and really just be genuine and authentic in your approach, and people will follow. And then genuinely, you know, do as, you know, don't do the age-old saying of, you know, do what I say, not what I do, but practice what you preach, you know, and so that's, it goes down to those fundamentals of that. And it's been an interesting journey. And I started leading very early on in my career. And I actually ended up taking a step back and not leading for a little bit, going back into a more of a practitioner role to hone in my skills a little bit better. And that was a really pivotal point in my career. And it made me a more dynamic leader. And, you know, taking a step back and honing your skill set, broadening your skill set. So when you get back into leading later on in your career, you're a lot more dynamic in your approach and your knowledge.
Fall 7 times and stand up 8. You know what? And a shout out to the team at Security Scorecard, because I think, you know what, it's really important that, you know, and I'll take 30 seconds to mention this. I understand, you know, conferences and engagements are all about, you know, you want to close sales and the ROI, so on and so forth. The fact that they chose this conversation as part of their package to come in says something about the ethics of a company, says something about the morale of a company. And I think that's a pretty strong message that they made by choosing this particular session. So Pia, you know, at heads up to, or sort of a shout out to everyone at Security Scorecard. Great. We're all understanding that we're at this position where, yes, you know, a lot of you and other women as well, and other non-binary groups as well have come to leadership positions in cybersecurity and in other tech spaces as well. But there's a question that's come up here, and it's about this aspect of the new normal or the new not normal. And now that we're in the world of COVID-19, a lot of folks are now looking at the fact that we're now back at the home. And the home, the stereotypical space where stereotypes are born and bred, and where we try to break them, so on and so forth. A lot of us are working from home. The question is the home reinforcing some of those gender stereotypes, specifically when it comes to women working in tech? And I want to start off with Kat, because in our pre-discussion to this, she raised some really important points about, look at how interaction has changed, and look at the world of Zoom now. This has an impact on women. Kat, can we get a little bit of perspective from you? And I'll go around the virtual table to get perspective from everyone. Kat, can you start?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think what happens is women, if you have children, especially, is you end up taking time off to become the primary parent during those mat leaves. And in Canada, we have a full year for mat leave, which is amazing, but it means you're home for a year and you end up assuming a lot of the responsibilities. So I've been doing all the grocery shopping for years because it just became my job. My husband's now assumed it. It's been amazing, but it's something I don't have to do. For sure, I think it was the Globe and Mail had an article that said women are opting out of work now in the COVID in order to mother. And someone I know had really wisely said, I don't think opt is the right word for that. Because women have a tendency to take the primary role as parent when children are born, in this kind of situation where children are now home and they need help with school and they need meals being made, it is often the women that are now assuming that role again. And that's been really difficult. And I know the moms I know are having enormous difficulty now trying to balance the mothering at home with the working at home. And having a supportive partner in your home that can help you is amazing. But there's single moms, there's women who don't have a partner, there are women who are out on the front lines working and struggling to find childcare for their kids. So as they say, you know, we're all in the same storm, but in different boats, and we can't judge what's happening in someone else's home. I think a lot of that is going to be just kind of cutting people a little slack and hopefully understanding that everyone is really trying to do their best and bring their best during this pandemic.
Very important point. This conversation also came up in the previous chat with Carol Todd, where, you know, it's not correct to assume that we're all in the same boat. Perhaps we're all in the same ocean, but some of us are in luxury boats and some of us are on yachts, or on rafts. So it's a very different. You have to pay attention to those nuances. Let's take that a little bit more, and let's, you know, let me talk about, you know, something that I reflected upon yesterday when I was doing a session. And, you know, for me, I'm my brand statement has always been, you know, I love my hoodies, I love my rings, you know, I like to carry out my swag that way. But you know what, part of my COVID look is I am not planning to shave. I'm going to let the beard grow. And I had a couple of folks make that comment to me. And for me, it was just like, yeah, whatever. I could care less. But it's not necessarily the same when it comes to the non-man, if I may say it that way. So, Sherry, I'll start off with you and then go to Helen. Some perspective on, you know, what's it like, you know, being ready for a Zoom meeting in this COVID world and as a woman. Sherry?
Well, I mean, I can actually attest to that. And I think that those of us that are on the call that are out west, that's 3 hours behind, could attest to that too, because I'm like rushing out of bed going, oh my God, I still, you know, look like I'm waking up, and I'm going to jump onto a call here pretty quick. So, you know, I think that there's still a perception by us ladies, I'm sorry, but, you know, we sort of have gone ahead and decided to veto on the makeup for the last few weeks and months, I think. And we were just making some comments about that just before we joined the call. And we were like, wow, this is cool. Like, you know, red lipstick on at 8 o'clock in the morning for me is a little bit of a stretch right now. But at the same time too, I think that we, you know, as women, we always feel like somehow we've got to show up and look good. And, you know, I've got a COVID hairdo right now and it's okay. I'm not ready to go into the salon, even though it's open, but that's okay. You know, like I'm actually learning a lot of valuable things about myself during this whole situation. And that is that we could just be ourselves. Like, why not just be ourselves? But, you know, again, I think that a lot of women, and including myself, do feel like I have to show up looking, you know, a little bit more polished than some of my male counterparts. Like, I was on a call yesterday with my boss who did not put himself on video. And then when he finally did, his hair is kind of sticking straight up. And it was really funny because he's like, oh, I guess I should have, you know, combed my hair. So, I mean, you know, some of my male counterparts are a little bit conscious of these things as well. But you know, if we're not on a call, we don't feel that we have to sort of, you know, do that extra, you know, 15 minutes of prep time or whatever it is that it takes. But I'm getting a lot faster at it now. So I'm just letting you know.
Helen, as someone, you know, who doesn't go with the flow, you're someone with your own flow and you lead your own flow. And with Leading Cyber Ladies, speaking to different youngsters, speaking to folks interested in the space and mentoring so many folks, is this something that you're hearing a lot, especially for women who want to get into cybersecurity, that you got to look a certain way and you got to carry yourself a certain way in order to sort of prove your presence? Can you comment a little bit on that, Helen?
Definitely. So it's a common fact that we know the first impression is from the appearance, right? So how a person look, and a lot of times, from my personal perspective, I on Zoom meetings, I try to look the same as I would look just a regular day at the office, right? Nothing special, but definitely not in my pajamas. Yeah, but I see a lot of pressure on whether or not we're gonna go on a video call, right? And young people are very conscious about that as well. We do have we're running a few sessions with Hack Student as well as another nonprofit that I do, and we actually had a video on, and we try to present ourselves that we are who we are. It's normal, and it's different norm right now, and we have to accept and give a little slack to each other. Not to be perfect. You don't have to be perfect, right? Perfect is boring. Come on. And as also for employers, and managers, I think it's important to understand what challenges women are experiencing, and provide more flexibility. And that's how our world is pivoting right now. We see more flexibility in the work hours, right? So we can attend children and do our job.
Thank you for that, Helen. And this aspect of attend to children, do our job, and there's an element over there that we have to recognize. There are some stereotypes that we still fall within. There's no harm in sort of adhering to some of those understandings of what it is that a man does and what it is that a woman does, but it's knowing how to break those standards as well and doing it effectively. And I want to come to Pia and then Nikhila, because I have a question here that says, look, you know what, you may not have followed the typical path, so on and so forth, but you still have to present yourself in a certain way. And the question is for both Pia and Nikhil. We'll start with Pia. The question that's come in is, when you're talking and when you're presenting a solution, etc., do you find that you have to carry yourself differently, especially now on Zoom, than your male counterparts? Not on how you look. Do you have to start the conversations first? Do you have to use certain words? Are you finding it different now online?
I think that's a really good question. So the question is, do I feel I have to take a different approach, essentially, as a woman? No, I have to take the approach that I feel is the most natural, right? And I think that a lot of times, I think somebody said it, men tend to speak out more and start to really control the conversation. Women tend to hold back. I think the most important thing is what value can I bring to this conversation? And when I'm presenting a solution, it's all about what are we trying to accomplish? What are the goals in which we're trying to achieve within this discussion? And as long as I'm adding in my true perspective and my knowledge and my experience into the conversation, I think that's the most important thing. So the approach has to be your own. It can't be someone else's. And as I think I mentioned this at the beginning of the conversation, I had a lot of male mentors, and I took on their voices, and it just sounded silly. I can't carry that voice. It's not my own. It doesn't sound right coming from me. So I think that's the most important thing to keep in mind is, bring your authenticity, bring your knowledge, bring your experience, and don't be afraid to speak up and give your perspective. I feel like a lot of women are afraid because they feel like what they're going to say isn't valuable. But there's a reason why you're in that conversation in the first place. You're there to bring value, and don't forget, we can't forget that.
Thank you. You're there to bring value. And Nikhila, this again, we'll take off the conversation. The question was also for you as well, in terms of, do you have to position yourself differently or speak differently or use certain words? But can you talk to us a little bit more about, in this COVID-19 environment, where you're in and out of interactions and it is online based, etc. Question for you, I'll change it a little bit, is are you finding yourself that as a woman in the space, you're having to connect even more just to remind folks that you're there and that you have presence and a voice at the table?
I'm sorry, you're dropping out a little bit on the end, but I believe I caught the first part regarding, do I have to connect a little bit more? I'm sorry, what was the last part that you ended with?
It was just an elongation of the same point, is that are you finding yourself, you have to book more meetings in order to stay tuned to people, so on and so forth?
Honestly, Ali, no. And I actually have attended, which we have a training called effective meetings. And I think we should handle our approach that same way, always effective. And, sometimes, we can lead and we can just participate. And to me, either way, it should be effective in the way you approach the entire situation. And also being a woman, sometimes we can definitely be misunderstood. I can be misunderstood in person. So especially over the phone, and sometimes I don't have my camera on, so you don't know if I'm actually making a face or if I sound a little angry or, I'm just really passionate about what I'm speaking about. But, that approach, like I was mentioning, is definitely important to pay attention to, like, hey, I'm really just outlining certain things that we need to accomplish in this time that we have. If we have an hour, I'm making sure that everyone is getting the return on investment. Because it shouldn't just be, let's talk and ramble like we usually do. No, it actually needs to be a better approach where we're actually trying to have something accomplished at the end of the day. And if you take that the wrong way, I'm sorry, but at the same time, I'm not sorry. And, I can come off wrong, but at the same time, all the ladies on this panel have said, we live in our truth. You have to accept that in somewhat shape or form, and then stop assuming that because we are women that we are angry or we're very emotional. That's not always the case. We're just as passionate as every man, in the room as well. And so, being in COVID-19, it doesn't change that, to be honest. It really doesn't change that. And then, we often get, over talked and, interrupted. And, and this effective meetings training, we're literally trying to stop that. Everyone deserves to have their opinion or thought thoroughly understood and heard, because once we're interrupted, we're like, okay, well, maybe it's not as valuable. And so in that same sense, I'm trying to bring that back, to the lab when we actually do go back. But, in these meetings and during our new norm, hey, I'm trying to just be effective. And, I really want everyone to, take on that same, initiative.
Thank you for that. But how it goes. When a man says something, well, it's a man who says something. And when a woman says it, well, there are certain contexts that go along with that. So I really like the fact that, you've asserted that voice very strongly. Now, I know that, we had some closing questions where we were going to go into some mentorship and, what are some good steps to take. But there are at least 3 questions before me that I'm going to weave in. And I know we have about 15 odd minutes left to 18 minutes. So I want to weave all of these questions in because I think it's really important. So number one is, this question has come in where they're saying, how do you call out? And the exact words are, how do you call out the bullshit when it's happening? And this is, they're asking for a skill set. So you're noticing it that someone's, in that environment and kind of lowering your perspective. How do you call it out? And how do you call it out strongly? Pia, I saw you nodding. It seems like you've got something strong to say. So security scorecard, tell us the score on this. Level it up.
Calling out the bullshit. I love that. So, because, every once in a while you get that situation where it's unfavorable or somebody's, not, their approach isn't, I guess, the best approach. And if it makes you feel uncomfortable and it makes you feel wrong, I always use the free commute rule. And we really don't have a commute right now, but if you feel uncomfortable, you feel bad waking up in the morning about a situation that happened, and you feel bad about it again when you go to sleep at night, and then if you still have that feeling in the next morning, it needs to be addressed, and you need to call it out. And usually calling it out is all about finding what was that motivation behind that comment or that situation that person exuded. And you really need to understand, put yourself in their shoes and figure out, okay, why was that why did that come at me in a certain way, right? And it's, once again, it's finding that understanding in that situation and where they came into, addressing that person directly, never in front of a group, always personal one-on-one. Turn your video on. I love doing this stuff in person, but we can't, right? So turn that video on. I want to video chat you, and we need to have a open conversation about this situation. So I still think of that 3 commute rule. That's always like, if I feel wrong 3 times coming into work, coming out of work, then it needs to be addressed.
Thank you for that, Pia. I do apologize. We have about 7 minutes, so I will weave in all the questions as well as I can. Helen, we'll go to you, and then we'll go to Kat, Sherry, and Michaela. Helen, from your perspective, if really quickly you can give us some tips or some advice on when you're noticing something not right, and it's having to do with your identity in that space. How do you address it?
Well, from my past experience, some say I have thick skin and it doesn't get to me easily, but everybody's sensitivity is different, right? And I think what's important is to understand how is it really ignoring your point of view. From my experience, when I wanted to speak up, I do speak up. And if I hear somebody saying an opinion that may be different from mine, I still do speak up. So my advice to you is be brave and don't let somebody take you down by negative comments. And for sure, we have HR services and community, right? Also don't let people bring you down by these comments and not addressing them. So if you are at work and something happened, you need to address this, because it's not okay for people to treat you somehow differently based on your gender. And as well in community, we have great leader supporters, right? In my leading cyber leaders in our group, I would never allow that. And if I see, we definitely will make sure that this is not gonna happen.
Thank you for that. And Helen, when you talk, I'm reminded of, my mom always used to tell me, it's like, don't ever remind me of that person who always followed. Be your own person, and because everybody else is taken, right? And I like that, we need to remember those sound bites. Let's take that conversation a little bit towards Kat. And Kat, as an independent consultant yourself, running your own firm, so on and so forth, you probably see this when you're engaging with clients sometimes. How is it that, you sort of draw the line to say, hey, something's being crossed here and we need to settle the score here?
This is, so it's a very layered question. And as Helen said, it really depends on who you are. I tend to have a thick skin, but I do want to kind of take the opportunity, like you said, because I go to a lot of conferences and address a very blunt person, and I address the elephant in the room or the inappropriate man in the room. As women, we go to conferences and inevitably we always get hit on by men in business contexts. And there are times where you could say, hey, you know what? I'm here for work and this isn't appropriate. But I've heard so many women say this. They're like, it's a senior person. I don't want to piss them off. It's a potential client. I don't want to ruin my chance of business because someone's going to tell these other people that I'm not good at what I do. And so myself included, there's a lot of women who will let this go and just go vent to other women. And it's not the right answer. But until we've kind of solved this problem, it is how people are sometimes handling this. And they're just kind of smiling and nodding and walking away to another group of women and saying, hey, this inappropriate thing happened. What's great is, siberX is an amazing group of people. So when you're at that kind of event, you know that you could come to the organizers and let them know something had happened. So I think reporting this kind of thing and explaining that this kind of behavior isn't appropriate would be good. It's an unfortunate situation where we're in, where that still has to be explained.
Thank you for that, Kerry. And you made an important point there about reporting these situations and observing them and documenting them. Sherry, let's take it to you. From one of the most highest level of enterprise that we can imagine. Do you think that there are processes in place where if women notice or non-male groups notice that something's happening on accordance of gender or other unnecessary lines, do we have the right mechanisms in place to report them and flag them?
Oh, absolutely. I think, especially in a very grounded government organization, it's the case. But does certain things happen? Sure it does. And I think that, we all know that we're stereotyped to a lot of degree in many cases. And the one thing I love, I'm just going to segue real quick, and that is that with, Zoom and everybody doing virtual meetings, it levels the playing ground so good. That sort of outside chatter kind of piece and the socialization aspects and all these other things are not necessarily happening. So we're actually getting down to business a lot quicker, and we're dealing with the facts. And I find that that's great because it gives everybody an opportunity for a voice, because we all have to share the mic. And that's such a great equality sort of situation, I find. And it's very empowering, I think, for some of us that may or may not get the mic during a boardroom meeting. So very good opportunity. One thing I always say, and as a manager, is build that trust with your employees and make sure that they know that these sorts of situations are zero tolerance. And if these things happen, then build that trust, that respect within the community and within your management group and whatnot. And then give them the opportunities to know where they can go and actually voice these concerns. And like Kat said too, start to create a culture of saying that these things are not okay anymore, and we need to all be mindful and respectful regardless of who you are, gender, race, ethnicity, or whatnot, and that we all have an opportunity to be equals in this space.
Thank you so much for that, Sherry. And we'll go into the last question and weave it all into quick minute each comments, starting with Nicaila. Nicaila, this aspect of where do you go to report, how do you flag these things? Can you speak to that, but also take in the closing question, which is what recommendations would you have to someone in terms of some educational resources or even groups to join in order to further empower yourself in this space? Nicaila?
So, honestly, I'm pretty much echoing everyone on this panel. We definitely have to find our voice in any room that we're in and make sure that it's heard, and don't feel bad for doing so. And, if we're talking about students, if we're talking about women that are interested in cybersecurity, I would definitely say do your research and look at those open resources. You may not even require a degree. You can actually go out and search at cyberary.it and pretty much say, hey, I like this, I like networking, or no, I really just like cybersecurity, and then figure out where you want to go from there. And amongst the groups, I've actually attended, a lot of the women in cybersecurity meetings here in LA, and I love them. We actually got to be at the Netflix building where we are all able to collaborate and network. Networking is very important because a lot of us share the same story, and you want to be amongst people that, have the same concerns as you and, want to grow in this industry as well. And then, being an African-American woman, that's important for me to see as well. I'm not the only one. There are some others, in this room sharing these same concerns, and how are we making these changes and not being, afterthought, and how are we bringing this back to our leaders and management as, not only filling the quota, but being needed. Our educational experiences, we share that amongst thousands of people, and, our experience as well, but we shouldn't be overlooked. And how do we make that change, and pretty much bridge those gaps? And that's very necessary. Being on this panel, I'm very grateful, because I'm able to share that story and empower and motivate others and inspire people to feel the same way and not be afraid to do so, just because, you may not always feel that people hear you or, they're listening. You just never know. There may be a few people that'll actually receive it and run with it and say, hey, we actually want you to be on another panel and speak to our about that, because this is what I've been doing literally all month. Every week of this month, I spoke to students, I spoke to women about being the best that they can be. And I hope if, everyone takes that type of message and run with it, we'll be greater as a community.
Fantastic. With 30 seconds for each person here. Helen, you lead Leading Cyber Ladies. How can folks get involved with it? What kind of programming do you have in place to support women in this space?
So I have 2 points here,
Sure.
and I'll be brief. First of all, if you are looking into getting into cyber, Leading Cyber Ladies is a great community to join. We provide educational sessions right now online, and it's being great. So I also recommend definitely join other groups as well. We have a great community in Toronto or wherever you are, in regards to your how you are included, or if you feel that you're uncomfortable, always talk to organizers, right? Organizers are responsible for making sure that nothing bad happens. And the second point I have for you, if you are a leader in a field, do mentor someone, do support them, either men or women, especially women, support them and guide them through. Don't forget where you come from, and make sure that you also bring them along.
Thank you so much. Tech with a Conscience, the tagline of Ontario Tech, our sister academic institution, and one that you personify. Kat, any recommendations on groups or educational sort of services that folks should be looking into with regards to empowering women in this space? You're on mute, Kat. Your standard Zoom thing, someone had to do it.
It was me. yeah, there's so much online, as everyone had said, like there's Cybrary and there's lots of things online. There's free. Durham, of course, has a great cybersecurity program now, and Rogers, there's lots of people who are offering it. So if you're looking for education, I always say start free and see if it's something that interests you. And then if it is, certainly there are many, many programs, and now everything's online. So that's not even a barrier anymore. You just look for the program that you're interested in and go for it.
Thank you for that. Yeah, thank you for the shout out to Ryerson. I see Rushmi Ashram is on as well. Debbie McKee is on as well. So, you know, a lot of folks who are in the space and are leaders. You know, a quick note about Debbie, you know, not necessarily a technical person, but always at every cybersecurity event to learn. And that shows you how holistic the space is. Pia, some closing comments from you on recommendations on mentorship groups.
Yeah, so I love LinkedIn as a great source for groups. There's tons of security groups, great discussion. So I've found some really great birds of a feathers in those groups. I would say for me, one piece of advice I could leave, especially for people, women who want to have a family and also have a career. One thing that somebody once told me was, you can have it all, but you can't have it all at the same time, right? So it's all about balance, and you can make it happen. You can have both, but it's really finding that balance and finding, and continuing to drive forward if you really feel strongly about this career and what you're doing in your plate. So that's all I'll say.
Thank you for that and that powerful quote. Sherry, 30 seconds for a closing comment. Any mentorship group that you would recommend for education?
I would, yeah, I'm just going to go quick. I mean, build your community of like-minded folks. So, I mean, right now I know that we're doing a lot of that virtually, but don't be afraid to shout out to people and say, hey, listen, you know, how did you get to where you are? Like, it's not just the mentorship thing, but just building that social environment. Yeah. And that's where you learn a lot. So, I mean, when you have one-on-one mentoring and stuff like that, it's more formalized. But if you have a community of like-minded folks, like we have a bunch of Slack channels here and we all just like gab back and forth and stuff out in BC, and you know, there's a lot of really good ideas that come out of these things, and so that's good. And Ali, I just wanted to thank you so much for being our moderator today, and of course we love you as always, so thank you so much for the wonderful questions and the insight.
Oh, you're always welcome. So in closing comments, I will say this is thank you for entrusting me with the role of moderating this session. Normally I'd be sitting in the crowd and like modeling or like smiling like I'm modeling for toothpaste. So it's pretty cool to be part of this, and I appreciate the trust, and I appreciate all of the perspective that came to the table. So with that, I will bring this panel to a close with a closing statement. You know what? Consistency is the playground for dull fools. That's why we chose to be, you know, non-consistent here. We chose, you know, we looked at different aspects of, you know, who is representing the space of cybersecurity. We have folks with different people of color. We have folks from different identities, from different ethnic backgrounds, to really bring home the point that this diversity is important. So with that said, I wish you all a wonderful remaining Cyber Exchange conference. There are a whole bunch of sessions that are going on right now, including the town hall with the region of Niagara. So I invite all of you to attend. We have a few more sessions and then the closing ceremony. So thank you again for all of your time. Thank you, ladies, for being so awesome. And I'll see you in the other sessions. See ya.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, ladies.
Bye.